welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week. And I really wanted to do this workshop from the actual location. We're in Yosemite National Park, and I'm here with Erin Dickman, who is a restoration ecologist.
Good morning.
And so we're here to talk about meadow restorations, and we have some wonderful examples to show you both live, and then we'll be showing you a short video clip to give you a little more background. But Erin, where are we right now?
Right now we're standing here at Awani Meadow in Yosemite Valley.
Yeah, and that's near Yosemite Village, and we can see the Awani Hotel right over there.
The hotel's over there. Yep, visitor center is right over there.
So most everybody, if you've been to Yosemite, if you visited the park, you probably would recognize this. Now, this has always been a beautiful place. Why was restoration even needed here? And then I guess first off, let's talk about what is a meadow.
A meadow is just a place on the landscape where shallow groundwater accumulates. So in this meadow, we're very close to the Merced River, and we have flows that come down Indian Creek and off the granite walls that create a saturated and inundated area dominated by grasses, sedges, and rushes. Yeah,
and I heard a statistic saying that the majority of San Francisco or the greater San Francisco's drinking water actually gets filtered by one Sierra meadow or another. And so meadows are a very important part when it comes to water quality.
Meadows are super important. They only comprise 3% of the landscape in the Sierra Nevada, yet their value is totally disproportionate on the landscape. They capture and store water and carbon, attenuate flooding. They're critical habitat for wildlife such as great gray owls, Yosemite toads, California red-legged frogs, and also have culturally significant plants to our tribal partners, such as materials for basketry and medicines. Not to mention their scenic qualities for humans and photographers alike.
Right. And you can see behind us, just to give you a little tour. If it wasn't September and it wasn't a drought year, what you'd be seeing right behind us would be Yosemite Falls. You can kind of see the staining on the granite, but that would be Yosemite Falls right behind us. So it is a very scenic place. And this being Stormwater Awareness Week, I guess it's not such a remote spot to be because a lot of water quality starts right here. And like you said, populations of San Francisco rely on this type of filtration. Now, people have been coming here for years. They've enjoyed this meadow for years. What caused the Park Service to think it needed to be restored? Why did it need to be restored?
That's a great question. In 2014, the park passed the Merced Wild and Scenic River Management Plan, and that plan was about a 20-year effort that had a lot of stakeholders, and so the park took a really close look at what infrastructure was located in the river corridor, what could be moved out of the river corridor, and what restoration opportunities existed. Traditionally, prior to the park being created, these lands were managed by the tribes who lived here. And these people are still here today and are beginning to re-engage with us on stewardship, but they had been removed from that role. Early settlers looked at meadows like this and said, this will be perfect to be a cattle corral or an agricultural field. And so many alterations were made to the valley's meadows in order to suit human needs at that time. Alterations such as ditching and draining of meadows, things like heavy grazing, even camping in meadows, driving in meadows, heavy visitor use, and then infrastructure, housing, sewage pipes, all sorts of things were installed in the meadows to the detriment of the meadow extent and also meadow quality.
And I guess that's because in the past, people didn't understand the science behind meadows, the function of meadows. A wet, boggy place breeds mosquitoes. And if you're trying to bring in tourists and campers, it's not a great place to camp or park cars. And so oh, well, what good is this? Let's fill it in. And that's what they did, isn't it?
Yeah, in one portion of this meadow on the southwest corner, a bunch of fill was added to make that area higher and drier. As a result, it was no longer really functioning as a wet meadow. It was essentially an upland area, very sparsely vegetated and extremely dry. So a recent restoration project was undertaken in 2018, and then we finished the excavation just recently to remove that fill, recontour the landscape to match the rest of the meadow, and replant it with native native wetland species.
Right. And this work has been in the progress, and what we're looking at is actually some earlier phases of that. And can you tell us a little bit maybe of the phases and what you're seeing as far as the success of the restoration?
Sure. There are many impacts in Awani Meadow, and so we've taken a phased approach. Starting in 2016 and 2017, we removed the drainage ditch that basically ran diagonal across the meadow and was draining the meadow actively. We filled that to match the adjacent meadow surface, and then we revegetated it with native species. Additionally, behind me, you can't really tell anymore, but this used to be a road that connected the road behind us and the road that was to the Awani Drive, that was to the Awani Meadow. That road was decommissioned and redundant and no longer needed, so we were able to restore that portion of the meadow and make it function as meadow again. Additionally, I mentioned the excavation of the fill from the southwest corner of the meadow, and that has been restored to meadow habitat. And finally, over in the trees over here, there was the Awani tennis courts. They had fallen into disrepair, were defunct and no longer needed. And also we found that visitors had kind of changed how they were using the park, and people were coming to Yosemite more for the scenic qualities
Not to play tennis.
offer, but not to play tennis. So we were able to remove that defunct tennis court and restore the oak woodland that was present there.
Yeah, and WGR's been privileged to have a very small part in this process. We work with the erosion sediment control plans and the SWIPs, which being Stormwater Awareness Week, you all, I'm sure, can appreciate that. And we've been watching this over the years too. And one of the great places to watch the progress is to go up to Glacier Point, which is right up behind us, about 3,200 feet up, and you get a bird's eye view of this meadow. So if you get to visit the park, maybe even this fall or next spring, go up there and take a look. And I tell you, visually, you could see the difference. Like the areas that have been restored, even in the summertime, were green, a much darker green color, where the areas still yet to be restored did not have that green. They were brown. You could tell they were dry.
Yeah, especially given the drought that we're currently in and climate change, we want to retain as much water as possible and allow that to slowly be released to the Merced River over the course of the summer. So meadows play a super important role in that. And yes, I agree. Qualitatively, we've seen an increase both in cover and in native species diversity.
Yeah, and let's talk just a little bit about that. You're a restoration ecologist. And so I know it's more than vegetating a meadow. What are you hoping on the larger scale to accomplish by the restoration activity with the ecology?
Yeah, that's a great question. All of these actions that we're taking in the valley, not only just here at Awani Meadow, but throughout Yosemite Valley, we're hoping to increase the health of the Merced River itself and the adjacent floodplains and meadows that are associated. We know that water is life, and that the river and meadows are super crucial to wildlife and plants and people. And so we want to make our watershed as healthy and resilient as possible.
Mm-hmm. And so today you can see a lot of diversity. Now, they don't want visitors just walking through the meadows, but there are boardwalks, there's places you can be on the fringe of it. And you can see a lot of diversity now, a lot of plant diversity. I understand you're starting to see even some butterflies, some plants that you hadn't seen before showing up.
Yeah, that's correct. When we do our revegetation, we try to introduce as much diversity into the plugs that we plant and also the seed mix that we sow to give that area a jump start in diversity and in hosting biodiversity. but we also have volunteers that show up. Once we restore the hydrology and the topography, we often find that there are seeds in the seed bank that are ready to volunteer and jump up.
And you also get volunteers that are of the unwanted variety, right?
That is true. We're very grateful here at Yosemite to have an invasive species team that focus heavily on removing the worst invasive species. And so what they typically do is go in prior to restoration, try to knock back those populations, especially if we're using heavy equipment or anything like that. And then additionally follow up for several years after restoration to continue to control those populations.
Great. And this is really all about the public's enjoyment, to enjoy these areas. I know that's a mission of the Park Service, is that the public can enjoy it as it should be. How do you want the public engaging with these meadows?
That's a great question. Of course, it's super inviting to go running out through the meadow, but they do have very sensitive soils. Imagine that they're like a really saturated sponge, and every time we run out there and trample on the meadow, it squishes the sponge down and it makes it less able to absorb that water. So we do have active restoration going on. We remove informal trails that are created by people's footprints in meadows in order to decompact the soils and restore plant life in those areas. There are meadows that have boardwalks. Cook's Meadow is a perfect example, right across from Yosemite Village, where you can go right through the heart of the meadow on this elevated boardwalk, get a really close view of wildlife and vegetation without harming the meadow. Another way you can do it is staying on the perimeter of the meadow and taking a look from there.
Yeah, and I recommend you taking time to do that. So speaking of active restoration, we have a real treat. We're actually going to see an area that has active restoration or very recently completed restoration. It's on the Merced River. And we're going to talk about, when we come back, about the connection between the Merced River and a healthy Merced River and the surrounding meadows, in this case, Stoneman Meadow, which is another restoration project. So we're going to have a video right now showing you and telling you a little bit more about meadow restoration. We're going to walk down to that site and then we'll rejoin you when we come back.
All right, everyone, hold with me while I start my screen share. And I am going to get there so we can show you the video. All right. There we go. And give me a minute while it loads up. Just a minute, it's loading. And here we go. Let me know in the chat if you cannot hear the video.
When I first enjoyed this superb view one glowing April day from the summit of the Pacheco Pass, the Central Valley, but little trampled or plowed as yet, was one furred rich sheet of golden composite, and the luminous wall of the mountain shone in all its glory. Then it seemed to me the Sierra should be called not the Nevada or snowy range, but the range of light.
Back in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt heard about this crazy Scotsman that was around Yosemite. He heard that he wandered around, he ate nothing but breadcrumbs and drank tea, and he had this Scottish accent, and he loved the parks and wild places. Theodore Roosevelt wanted to meet this person, so he reached out. John Muir, of course, obliged, because one of John Muir's passions in life was not only exploring Yosemite, but talking to government officials about preserving wild places.
The Sierra is about 500 miles long, 70 miles wide, and from 7,000 to nearly 15,000 feet high. In general views, no mark of man is visible on it, nor anything to suggest the richness of the life it cherishes or the depth and grandeur of its sculpture. None of its magnificent forest-crowned ridges rises much above the general level to publish its wealth. No great valley or lake is seen, or river, or group of well-marked features of any kind standing out in distinct pictures. Even the summit peaks, so clear and high in the sky, seem comparatively smooth and featureless. Nevertheless, glaciers are still at work in the shadows of the peaks, and thousands of lakes and meadows shine and bloom beneath them. And the whole range is furrowed with canyons to a depth of from 2,000 to 5,000 feet, in which once flowed majestic glaciers, and in which now flow and sing a band of beautiful rivers. The walls of these park valleys of the Yosemite kind are made up of rocks, mountains in size, partly separated from each other by narrow gorges and side canyons, and they are so sheer in front and so compactly built together on a level floor that, comprehensively seen, the parks they enclose look like immense halls or temples lighted from above. Awful in stern majesty, types of permanence, yet associated with the beauty of the frailest and most fleeting forms. Their feet set in pine groves and gay emerald meadows, their brows in the sky, bathed in light, bathed in floods of singing water, as if into these mountain mansions nature had taken pains to gather her choicest treasures, to draw her lovers into close and confiding communion with her.
My name's Joy Bechet, and I'm a plant ecologist here at Yosemite National Park in the Resources Management and Science Division. And I oversee wetland and meadow restoration and monitoring, some of which is part of the Merced River Plan restoration implementation here in Yosemite Valley. Here we are at Awani Meadow in Yosemite Valley, which is one of about 8 or 9 meadows in Yosemite Valley. And at first glance, it might look green and lush and in good ecological condition. But in fact, over the past 100 years or so, we've seen quite a bit of alteration to the meadow as a result of human activities.
The Yosemite Valley was first discovered by Euro-American settlers in 1851 during the Mariposa Wars, a conflict between the so-called Mariposa Battalion and the Awani and Chowchilla tribes. It took less than 5 years for an entrepreneur named James Mason Hutchings to visit the Yosemite Valley, seeing in the natural beauty an opportunity for a new tourist attraction. It wasn't long until the first modifications to Yosemite started to appear. The Tunnel Tree, Wawona Hotel, Camp Curry, the Yosemite Firefall. Hutchings set up shop, claiming 160 acres of land in the Wawona area on the basis of the Federal Homestead Act, a claim which was later invalidated by the federal government. Soon, other improvements were proposed to make Yosemite a more hospitable place for the steadily increasing number of tourists. A toll road into Yosemite Valley was opened in 1856, charging an exorbitant $2 per person. 3 stagecoach roads were built in the mid-1870s. In 1878, the federally appointed guardian of Yosemite elected to drain a swamp in the valley by dynamiting a breach in a glacial moraine. Mosquitoes were a nuisance to park visitors, so ditches were dug to drain meadows, and some wet areas were filled in with road base and construction waste. Soon, the extent of meadow areas in the valley dropped from over 750 acres in the 1860s to only 340 acres at the end of the 20th century. But these changes were not limited to Yosemite. The past 200 years have seen the state of California lose nearly 99% of its wetland habitat through land conversion activities such as infrastructure and agriculture.
One of the misfortunes of urban sprawl is the loss of prime agricultural land. Man with his modern machines is consuming land at a frightening rate. Across our nation, about 3,000 acres are cleared every day to make room for the growing ranks of suburban dwellers.
These ecological and hydrological changes throughout California resulted in unnaturally dry conditions, paving the way for an increase in non-native invasive plants that prefer dry and disturbed soil.
What really guides us on our day-to-day management is the preservation of the park and the natural systems that prevail. So what we've been able to do over the past several years is do a lot of great restoration projects. We've restored the Awani Meadow, for example, recently, the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. We finished a landmark restoration project there. A lot of what I love to call the undevelopment projects. And by that I mean, you had a lot of places where, at the time, the Awani is a good example, they felt that this is a luxury hotel, so there should be a tennis court and a golf course. Well, nowadays, people don't come to national parks to go golfing or play tennis, and so the golf course was removed a long time ago, and we're in the process of removing the tennis courts.
Restoration of wetland and meadow ecosystems is warranted and important for us here at Yosemite National Park, and that we recognize the importance and the sensitivity of this unique ecosystem on the landscape.
The Meadow. John Muir, one of her greatest admirers, may have come closest to describing her beauty.
A milky way of snow petals in the wings, girdling the rugged mountain like a cloud.
From the green pastures of Psalm 23 to the iconic opening of The Sound of Music, the vivid tapestry of wind-blown grasses and wildflowers has long held a special, almost spiritual place in the hearts of untold generations. The term meadow is typically used to refer to an open area vegetated by grass and non-woody plants, and which falls into one of three basic categories. Agricultural meadows are open fields which, unlike rangelands, are not used for grazing. Transitional meadows are man-made, either through farming activities, repeated controlled burns, or manual clearing. Perpetual or natural meadows typically occur in areas inhospitable to woody plants, alpine meadows above the tree line, or wet meadows with a high water saturation. The meadows in Yosemite National Park are a mixture of transitional meadows and natural meadows. The Awani tribe would regularly set fire to the valley floor, resulting in what early Euro-American visitors described as a park-like appearance. Yosemite guardian Galen Clark remarked on his first visit to the park in 1855, "There was no undergrowth of young trees to obstruct clear open views in any part of the valley from one side of the Merced River across to the base of the opposite wall. The area was clear open meadow ground with an abundance of luxuriant native grasses and flowering plants, at least 4 times as large as at the present time." The regular burns thinned out the tree cover and removed underbrush, promoting stability in the large meadow areas. But the burns stopped with the Euro-American settlers who viewed the meadows as prime livestock grazing land, especially when seeded with non-native forage grass. The estimated tens of thousands of cattle and up to 100,000 sheep left a muddy footprint on the meadow ecosystem. As with many things in life, the real value of the Yosemite Meadows was seen most clearly after they largely disappeared. Though geographically small in size, meadows play a critical role in the ecosystem by providing habitat and breeding grounds for many different plants, animals, and insects. The meadows also play a surprisingly significant role in water management and water quality. Though meadows comprise only 3% of Yosemite National Park, these giant natural sponges are responsible for filtering the majority of San Francisco's water supply, coming from the Hetch Hetchy watershed. Not only are meadows incredibly effective at trapping sediment, but they can absorb and store a substantial amount of water during the spring snowmelt. A meadow's ability to absorb water has proved a vital asset to the Yosemite and Greater California ecosystems. Meadows play a key role in recharging groundwater aquifers, and their ability to withstand high water flows make them effective flood attenuators, a significant benefit to nearby infrastructure.
Before we implement a restoration project, we begin the planning phase. Often we look to different tools we can use to determine what the natural condition of that area is. We might look to historic topographic maps, historic aerial imagery, or historic photographs to start to unlock an idea of what that ecosystem used to be like before alteration or disturbance. Here in Yosemite Valley, we have a wide array of resources that we can look to. We have a U.S. Geological Survey topographic map that's very high in resolution for the entire Yosemite Valley that can tell us what the topography and the hydrology looked like. Here in Awani Meadow, we saw that in 1919, when the U.S. Geological Survey map was created, there was already alteration to the meadow, including ditching, the carriage road, and filling of wetland habitat. For that reason, we look to other historical resources, such as historic photographs or even current infrastructure that might tell us something about how the area is currently being altered today. For example, we know there's a network of clay pipe drainage in the adjacent area that could be diverting water away from the area that originally flowed into Awani Meadow, meaning that the meadow is currently in a much drier state than historical wetter conditions that likely prevailed in the meadow.
The Awani Meadow Restoration Project has been underway for several years. In 2016, the National Park Service demolished and removed the carriage road that once led to the Awani Hotel and returned that area to natural conditions. The newly restored area on the east side of the meadow saw a resurgence of native wetland plant communities, reestablishment of willow groves, and a healthy wet meadow system. In 2017, the ditches draining the central portion of the meadow were filled in, bringing back the natural sheet flow hydrology. In 2018, the Park Service removed over 8,000 cubic yards of fill that had been put in the southwest corner of the meadow in an attempt to control mosquitoes. In 2020, the Park Service plans to finalize the restoration effort in the southwest corner of the meadow and remove the remaining fill.
At Awani Meadow, there was a series of compliance steps that needed to happen before we could break ground with our restoration work. For example, we needed to comply with the National Historic Preservation Act and consult our State Historic Preservation Officer on any cultural resources that might be a concern in the area. We also needed to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service on any threatened and endangered species in the area as part of the Endangered Species Act. In addition, we work with the Army Corps of Engineers for our wetland permitting purposes.
Well, WGR's role with the Awani Meadow Restoration Project was basically to design the erosion and sediment control plan, which was a part of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, a requirement of the State Water Board's construction general permit. And so our goal with the project was basically to stabilize soils that were being disturbed. Obviously, when you're restoring a meadow, just part of the project is to disturb soils with the intention to recreate or restore the vegetation that was there previously. And so that was really our objective, was to, as quickly as possible, get things restored. And so what we relied upon was native vegetation. And of course, the National Park Service's biologists were analyzing that, and were coming up with a plant selection that was appropriate to this environment.
Overall, our restoration goals for the entire meadow, or meadow restoration in general, is to return natural ecological processes. And the way that we do that is by restoring natural topography that supports natural hydrology, such as shallow sheet flow hydrology, shallow groundwater tables, where you have a wet meadow system where native wet meadow plants can prevail.
But you'll notice that in the meadow, there is quite a diversity in plants that are present, both grasses and broadleaves and other plants that are present. And that actually, from an erosion professional's point of view, provides great stabilization below ground. When we get different types of root masses locking down soils, that is what we want. And so the project itself, restoring the meadow, was the erosion control that we were specifying. So what we were really concerned about were those periods of time when it was disturbed and thunderstorms might happen in the summer or before the plant growth was reestablished. So we had some temporary controls in place, like straw wattle and other things. But really, by redesigning it, getting it to match pre-existing contours, that was the key to this project.
In order to undevelop a developed area, a certain amount of destruction and demolition must take place. The sight of heavy earth-moving equipment invading a fragile ecosystem can be quite a shock, but there are times when the edge of a surgeon's scalpel is the only path to healing. In the case of the Awani Meadow, truckloads of fill material were brought in to eliminate mosquito breeding areas. Now, decades later, it will take a team of earth movers to remove all the non-native fill material and restore the meadow to its historical topographical contour and hydrology.
The goal of active ecological restoration is to help kickstart or jumpstart that rehabilitation process so that we can allow ecosystems to heal themselves and start to, in meadow systems, to help reshape their own natural topography or hydrology or native plant communities over time. In some areas in Yosemite Valley, natural processes prevail. For example, we now recognize and understand that Mirror Lake is an area that will eventually fill in with sediment and become a meadow over time. And while some people in the past have thought that meadows are short-lived on the ecosystem and often occur along lake edges that will eventually become meadow over time, we've found that meadows can actually persist on the landscape for hundreds or even thousands of years if they remain in proper ecological function. Therefore, our goal is to restore those ecological processes and functions that will help our ecosystems prevail into the future, where we can preserve and protect meadow ecosystems for future generations to enjoy.
And we're doing a lot of these projects that are bringing the restoration back in focus, all still providing for the visitor access and the enjoyment, but allowing the natural processes to prevail.
Much has changed in the Yosemite Valley since the time of John Muir. The mark of man, once easy to miss, is now plainly visible in the park valley. But the admirable goal of the Yosemite Park Service is to remove as many of man's fingerprints as possible, restoring the ebb and flow of natural processes, while still providing for the park's enjoyment and accessibility by the general public. Because, as Muir so passionately observed, some of life's most important truths can be uncovered by gazing intently at the wonders of creation.
I would fain ask my readers to linger a while in this fertile wilderness, to trace its history from its earliest glacial beginnings, how happy the birds are all summer, and some of them all winter, how the poached marmots drive tunnels under the snow, and how fine and brave a life the slanted coyote lives here, and the deer and bears. But knowing well the difference between reading and seeing, I will only ask attention to some brief sketches of its varying aspects as they are presented throughout the more marked seasons of the year.
Alrighty, I'm going to stop the share and hopefully we will be back with our host. They went to a new location, so let's make sure we can connect with them.
Hey, everybody, it's John and Aaron. We're back with you. We're at a new location. So, Aaron, where are we at?
Hold on, we can't see or hear you.
They can't see.
Looks like your video's off. And you're muted. I don't know.
Sure.
We can hear you. Can you talk?
Can you hear us, Rebecca?
We can hear you, but we cannot see your
Rebecca,
screen.
can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, video.
Let me try this here.
Yeah, we're doing something.
Get that now.
All right, how about now? Can you hear us? Yes?
We can hear you, but we can't see your screen.
All right, Rebecca, why don't you do this? Since you can hear us, why don't you share your screen, the next PowerPoint slide where you show the river restoration picture and also the graphic.
Okay. All right, here we go. Merced River and the Stoneman Meadow.
And you might try sliding that, see if that gives us a picture. All right, so Aaron, we're standing on Stoneman Meadow. They're looking at a picture. Unfortunately, they don't see us live right now.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the river restoration, the Merced River. How does this play into Meadows? And what have you been trying to accomplish with the river?
As I mentioned earlier, the Parks Meadows have been significantly
Sounds like their connection is really bad right now, everyone. So hold with us as we try to figure out. Did we lose them? They're still there. We can't hear them.
Can you hear us now?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes. Unfortunately, we're in a real weak signal. We kind of had a feeling this might happen. We took a chance, but you still can't see us?
Well, we're screen sharing, so I can't see anything. If you can see them, put it in the chat.
So Aaron, well, while we're on, we'll try one more time, Rebecca, and if we get cut off, then you can just end the meeting. But okay, so you were talking, Aaron, about the Merced River and just historic use of it.
Yeah, so we've suffered from a lot of human uses that we've discovered that are detrimental to river health. And so we're trying to correct that in concert with the impacts in Meadows. So starting in 2016, we've embarked upon one riverbank restoration project per season with the aim of narrowing river reaches that have widened substantially and also reintroducing a riparian vegetation component and creating habitat for aquatic animals and an ecosystem. In a lot of places, we had completely denuded riverbanks or riverbanks that were exclusively riprap and really weren't hosting any riparian species. So what we've done is installed an engineered log structure where we embed logs into the bank of the river and stick the root wad out into the river. These root wads help us to slow flows, capture sediment, provide microhabitat in between the root wads for aquatic animals and plants, and allow willows to establish where we didn't have any before.
Right. In fact, Rebecca, if you're sharing your screen, I know you can see both a picture of the restoration activity, but you can also see some of the engineering drawings showing how that bank was armored. And there's actually a lot of technology that goes into that. And it's very intentional. In fact, we were out here the other day, Aaron, walking around, and someone was actually asking us, what is that root mass doing in the river? A lot of the public don't recognize exactly what they're looking at.
Yes, certainly it's an unusual site, and we do have some informational posters up at the site to try to explain what we're doing. What's neat is if we go back and look at the 2016 and 2017, the earlier projects, we're really seeing nature take a hold, and the root balls being covered by willows and being surrounded by sedges and grasses. And so eventually they'll just blend into the landscape around. But at first it does have kind of an abrupt, surprising look to visitors. Usually though, once they understand what we're doing, they're supportive and excited about the potential for riverbank restoration.
And so by stabilizing riverbanks, then we get a healthy meadow. How does that work?
Yeah, so we don't want to see any more erosion. We don't want to see any more channel widening. By having a wider channel, it reduces connection to the adjacent floodplain and meadow, lowers the water table, and reduces potential for seasonal flooding, which is actually really helpful for the meadows. So by narrowing the channel, healing the channel, we're hoping to connect
maybe towards also have a situation where meadows aren't losing their water through man-made channels.
That is correct. Yeah, in many cases, drainage ditches have been dug in valley meadows to drain the meadow and dump that water out into the river. So by filling the adjacent meadows where they had a drainage ditch and revegetating that, we're retaining water and slowly releasing it to the river rather than dumping it into the river.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. We probably are going to lose our signal, but you know what? If you want to come see this, people can come see this for themselves.
Yeah.
How would they do that?
The easiest way to do that would be to come to Stoneman Bridge, which is really close to Curry Village, and look on both sides of the bridge at the riverbanks, and you'll see the 2017, 2020, and 2021 riverbank projects, and you can get a view of what's going on out here.
In fact, there's a trail that they can take, and you can see the progression, and you can see how things look, how they're forming that were installed.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the progress.
Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for showing us around, being a part of Stormwater Awareness Week. And thank all of you for your patience. We wanted to show you this beautiful place. I wish I could have brought you here, but please come and see us. And we'll see you at one of the next Stormwater Awareness Week workshops. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for attending. We have lots of workshops the rest of the week, so be sure to check back on our website. And this workshop, if you missed any part of it, is recorded and it will be uploaded to our website so you can watch it again. Alrighty, see you later.